The crisp autumn morning at Highgrove House began like countless others, with Camilla Parker Bowles stepping into her beloved garden sanctuary. The October air carried the sweet scent of late-blooming roses, and golden leaves danced gently in the breeze. She had always found peace among her flowers, a tranquil escape from the demanding schedule that came with being the Duchess of Cornwall. Charles had departed early for London, attending yet another series of official engagements. Their routine had become second nature over the years, brief kisses goodbye, promises to call later, and the understanding that duty often separated them during daylight hours. Camilla cherished these quiet mornings when she could tend to her garden without interruption. As she knelt beside her prized dahlia bed, carefully deadheading the spent blooms, an unusual sensation crept through her chest. At first, she dismissed it as nothing more than the minor aches that came with aging. After all, gardening required bending, stretching, and physical effort that sometimes left her feeling stiff. But this feeling was different, a tightness that seemed to wrap around her rib cage like an invisible band. The head gardener, Thomas, noticed her pause and straighten up with an expression he had never seen before. Camilla's face had grown pale, and she pressed her hand against her chest with a look of confusion rather than pain. Thomas had worked at Highgrove for 15 years and knew the Duchess well enough to recognize when something was amiss. "Your Royal Highness, are you quite all right?" Thomas asked, setting down his pruning shears and moving closer. Camilla attempted to smile. That gracious expression she had perfected through decades of public life. "Oh, it's nothing, really, Thomas. Perhaps I've been overdoing things a bit." Her voice carried its usual warmth, but there was an underlying breathlessness that hadn't been there moments before. The sensation intensified, spreading from her chest down her left arm with a peculiar tingling that made her fingertips feel numb. She tried to continue working, convinced that movement would ease whatever was troubling her body. But as she reached for another flower, the world seemed to shift slightly, as if she were viewing everything through water. Thomas watched with growing concern as the Duchess swayed almost imperceptibly. Her usually steady hands trembled as she attempted to grip her gardening tools. The color had drained completely from her cheeks, and tiny beads of perspiration appeared on her forehead despite the cool morning air. "Perhaps we should go inside, Your Royal Highness," Thomas suggested gently. "Maybe have a cup of tea." The mention of tea seemed to anchor Camilla momentarily. Tea was comfort, normalcy, the British solution to everything from minor inconveniences to major crises. She nodded slowly, but as she attempted to stand, her legs felt strangely disconnected from the rest of her body. The garden, which had always been her place of strength and renewal, suddenly felt foreign and unstable. Taking a few careful steps toward the house, Camilla felt the odd tightness in her chest transform into something more urgent. It wasn't exactly pain in the traditional sense, but rather an overwhelming pressure, as if someone had placed a heavy weight directly on her breastbone. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, and she found herself unable to draw a satisfying breath. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, appeared at the kitchen door with her usual efficient smile, ready to discuss the day's schedule. But her expression quickly changed to alarm when she saw the Duchess approaching with Thomas supporting her elbow. "My word. What's happened?" Mrs. Henderson rushed forward, her maternal instincts immediately engaged. "I'm not entirely sure," Camilla managed to say, though her voice now sounded distant even to her own ears. "I feel rather peculiar." The two staff members exchanged worried glances. They had served the royal household long enough to understand the gravity of any health concern, particularly when it involved someone of Camilla's stature and responsibilities. More importantly, they genuinely cared for the woman who had always treated them with respect and kindness. As they helped her into the morning room, Camilla's symptoms escalated with frightening speed. The pressure in her chest became crushing, and waves of nausea rolled through her stomach. Cold sweat broke out across her skin, and she began to feel lightheaded in a way that seemed to disconnect her from her immediate surroundings. "I think," she whispered, gripping the arm of her favorite chintz armchair, "I think you should call someone." The understatement was typical of Camilla's character, understated, dignified, never wanting to cause a fuss. But Mrs. Henderson had raised 4 children and recognized a medical emergency when she saw one. Without hesitation, she reached for the telephone to call the estate's security, who would know exactly which numbers to dial in such circumstances. Thomas remained by Camilla's side, noting how her breathing had become increasingly labored. Her face had taken on a grayish pallor that seemed to emphasize every line and shadow. Most concerning was the way she kept pressing her hand to her chest, as if trying to physically hold something together that was coming apart. "Should we call His Royal Highness?" Mrs. Henderson asked quietly, her hand hovering over the phone. Camilla's eyes, usually so bright and alert, seemed to struggle to focus. "Not yet," she managed. Don't worry, Charles, unnecessarily. Perhaps it's just—" But even as she tried to minimize the situation, her body was telling a different story. The crushing sensation spread across her entire chest, and her left arm began to ache with an intensity that made her gasp softly. The room seemed to dim around the edges, as if someone were slowly turning down the lights. The estate's physician, Dr. Matthews, lived only 20 minutes away and had been caring for the royal family's medical needs for several years. Mrs. Henderson had called him immediately after notifying security, and his calm, professional voice on the phone provided some reassurance in the growing crisis. As they waited for medical help to arrive, time seemed to move strangely for Camilla. Moments stretched into what felt like hours, while simultaneously racing past in a blur of increasing discomfort and confusion. She found herself thinking of Charles, wishing he were there to hold her hand, to provide the strength and comfort that had sustained her through so many challenges over the years. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, who had spent decades in the public eye dealing with criticism and scrutiny, was now facing something completely beyond the realm of public relations or royal protocol. This was raw, human vulnerability in its most basic form, a body in distress, regardless of titles or positions. Thomas and Mrs. Henderson maintained a quiet vigil, offering gentle words of encouragement while privately wrestling with their own fears. They had become deeply fond of the Duchess over the years, appreciating her genuine interest in their lives and families. The thought of anything serious happening to her was almost unbearable. Dr. Matthews arrived with reassuring efficiency, his medical bag in hand and his demeanor calm but alert. One look at Camilla told him everything he needed to know about the severity of the situation. Her vital signs confirmed what he had suspected from Mrs. Henderson's description over the phone. This was not a minor episode that could be treated with rest and aspirin. "We need to get you to hospital immediately, Your Royal Highness," he said gently but firmly, already reaching for his phone to call for an ambulance equipped to handle such emergencies. The word hospital seemed to pierce through the fog that had been building around Camilla's consciousness. Hospitals meant serious problems, extended absences from duties, and most troubling of all, genuine cause for worry. Her hand moved instinctively toward her phone, the gesture speaking to her deepest need in that moment. "Charles," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of 30 years of partnership, love, and mutual dependence. In that moment, royal protocol and public image faded into insignificance, leaving only the most human need for the person who mattered most. The ambulance arrived at Highgrove House with practiced efficiency, its crew having been briefed during the journey about the high-profile nature of their patient. Paramedics Sarah Chen and Robert Williams had handled numerous emergency calls throughout their careers, but treating a member of the royal family brought additional layers of responsibility and scrutiny that weighed heavily on their minds. Sarah, the lead paramedic, immediately took charge of the situation with professional calm. Her initial assessment confirmed Dr. Matthews' concerns. Camilla was experiencing a cardiac event that required immediate intervention and rapid transport to the specialized cardiac unit at Royal United Hospital in Bath. "Your Royal Highness, we're going to take excellent care of you," Sarah said, her voice carrying the kind of authoritative gentleness that comes from years of emergency medicine. "I need you to try to stay calm while we get you ready for transport." Camilla nodded weakly, though her ability to respond was becoming increasingly limited. The crushing sensation in her chest had intensified, and she felt as though she were trying to breathe through water. Each breath required conscious effort, and the simple act of speaking had become exhausting. Robert worked quickly to establish an IV line while Sarah attached monitoring equipment that would track Camilla's vital signs during transport. The electronic beeping of the cardiac monitor filled the morning room, creating an urgent soundtrack that contrasted sharply with the peaceful domestic setting. Mrs. Henderson hovered nearby, wringing her hands and repeatedly glancing at the telephone. The weight of responsibility was enormous. When should they call Prince Charles? How much information should they share? What if the situation deteriorated further before they could reach him? "Ma'am," Dr. Matthews said quietly to Mrs. Henderson, "I think it's time to contact His Royal Highness. This is serious enough that he needs to be informed immediately." The housekeeper nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she dialed the private number that would connect her to Charles's protection officers. The conversation was brief but urgent, conveying just enough information to ensure that arrangements would be made for Charles to rush back from London. Meanwhile, the paramedics worked with synchronized precision to prepare Camilla for transport. Sarah administered medication to help manage the cardiac symptoms, while Robert communicated with the hospital's emergency department, providing vital information that would ensure the cardiac team was ready upon their arrival. "We're going to move you now, Your Royal Highness," Sarah explained gently. "You might feel a bit disoriented, but that's completely normal. We'll be with you every step of the way." The transfer from the comfortable familiarity of her morning room to the clinical environment of the ambulance marked a profound shift for Camilla. Suddenly, she was no longer the Duchess of Cornwall in her own home, but a patient in medical distress, dependent entirely on the expertise and care of people she had never met before. As the ambulance began its urgent journey toward Bath, Camilla found herself drifting in and out of clear consciousness. The medication was helping to manage some of her symptoms, but the overall situation remained precarious. Through the small window, she caught glimpses of the Gloucestershire countryside rushing past, fields and villages she had driven through countless times, now viewed from an entirely different perspective. Sarah maintained a constant dialogue, both to monitor Camilla's responsiveness and to provide reassurance. "Your vital signs are stabilizing nicely," she reported. "The hospital team is fully prepared for our arrival, and they're some of the finest cardiac specialists in the country." The mention of specialists brought a new wave of reality to the situation. Camilla had always prided herself on her robust health and active lifestyle. The idea of being a cardiac patient seemed almost surreal, as if this were happening to someone else entirely. Robert radioed ahead with updated information, his voice calm but urgent, as he described the ongoing changes in Camilla's condition. The response from the hospital indicated that Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, the head of cardiology, was personally overseeing preparations for their arrival. Back at Highgrove, Thomas had the difficult task of securing the house and managing the inevitable media attention that would follow once news of the emergency became public. The estate's security team worked to ensure that normal operations could continue while protecting the privacy of the ongoing medical situation. Charles, meanwhile, was racing back from London in his official car, accompanied by his protection officers and a small medical team. The journey seemed endless, filled with urgent phone calls to coordinate his arrival at the hospital and gather updates on Camilla's condition. His usual composed demeanor cracked under the strain of helplessness. For all his titles and influence, he could do nothing to alter what was happening to the woman he loved. At the hospital, Dr. Thornton assembled her team with military precision. The emergency department had been quietly cleared to ensure privacy, and the cardiac catheterization lab was prepared for immediate intervention if necessary. Word had spread through the medical staff with remarkable speed, though professional discretion ensured that the preparations remained focused solely on providing the best possible care. The ambulance arrived at Royal United Hospital exactly 47 minutes after leaving Highgrove House. The emergency department doors opened to receive a patient who was fighting for her life, though her condition had stabilized somewhat during transport thanks to the paramedics' expert care. Dr. Thornton met the ambulance personally, her experienced eye immediately assessing Camilla's condition as the stretcher was wheeled through the automatic doors. "Good work," she told Sarah and Robert quietly. "Your interventions probably made all the difference." The transition from ambulance to hospital bed was seamless, with nursing staff taking over monitoring while Dr. Thornton began her comprehensive examination. The cardiac monitor showed irregularities that confirmed the severity of the situation, but nothing that couldn't be managed with proper intervention. "Your Royal Highness, I'm Dr. Thornton," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had handled countless cardiac emergencies. "We're going to run some tests to determine exactly what's happening, and then we'll know the best way to help you." Camilla tried to respond, but her voice had become little more than a whisper. The medication and the stress of the situation had taken a significant toll on her ability to communicate clearly. However, her eyes remained alert, reflecting both her fear and her determination to cooperate fully with whatever treatment was necessary. The next hour passed in a blur of medical procedures, tests, and consultations. Blood work, EKGs, and imaging studies all contributed to building a complete picture of Camilla's cardiac status. Each test revealed more about the nature and extent of the problem, guiding Dr. Thornton's treatment decisions. Nursing staff worked quietly around her bed, monitoring vital signs and adjusting medications as needed. The cardiac unit had an atmosphere of controlled urgency. Everyone understood the importance of their patient, but more importantly, they were committed to providing the same excellent care they would offer to anyone in similar circumstances. Charles arrived at the hospital just as Dr. Thornton was completing her initial evaluation. His face was pale with worry, and his usual impeccable appearance showed signs of the hasty journey from London. The sight of Camilla connected to multiple monitors and IV lines was a shock that no amount of preparation could have lessened. "How is she?" he asked Dr. Thornton, his voice carrying the strain of the past few hours. "She's stable at the moment, Your Royal Highness," the doctor replied carefully. "We're still conducting tests to determine the full extent of the cardiac event, but I'm cautiously optimistic about her response to treatment so far." Charles moved to Camilla's bedside, taking her hand gently in both of his. Her fingers felt cold and fragile, so different from the strong, capable hands he knew so well. For a moment, the enormity of almost losing her threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. The cardiac unit fell into an unusual hush as Charles took his place beside Camilla's bed. Outside the private room, medical staff continued their duties while maintaining the discreet professionalism that the situation demanded. Dr. Thornton had briefed her team about the importance of privacy, but more crucially, about treating their patient with the same dedication they brought to every person under their care. Camilla's eyes fluttered open as she felt the familiar warmth of Charles's hand enveloping hers. The medication had created a strange sense of detachment from her body, but his presence immediately grounded her in a way that no medical intervention could achieve. She tried to speak his name, but only managed a soft sound that barely resembled speech. "I'm here, my darling," Charles whispered, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed others to witness. You're going to be perfectly fine. The doctors here are absolutely brilliant." The reassurance was as much for himself as for Camilla. Seeing her so vulnerable, connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat, forced him to confront the reality of how much she meant to him. Their relationship had weathered decades of public scrutiny and personal challenges, but this moment stripped away everything except the most fundamental truth. They belonged together. Dr. Thornton approached the bed with test results that would determine the next phase of Camilla's treatment. Her expression was carefully neutral, trained by years of delivering both good and difficult news to worried families. The cardiology team had worked with remarkable efficiency to piece together a complete picture of what had happened. "The good news," Dr. Thornton began, "is that we've been able to determine the exact nature of the cardiac event. Your Royal Highness experienced what we call a myocardial infarction, but we caught it early enough that the damage appears to be minimal." Charles felt his knees weaken slightly at the clinical terminology, but Dr. Thornton's calm demeanor provided reassurance that the situation, while serious, was manageable. She continued with the detailed explanation that would guide their treatment decisions. "We'll need to perform a cardiac catheterization to open the blocked artery," she explained. "It's a routine procedure that we perform regularly, and I expect excellent results given how quickly we were able to begin treatment." Camilla's eyes moved between Charles and Dr. Thornton, processing what she could understand through the haze of medication and exhaustion. The word procedure carried weight that penetrated even her medicated state, but Charles's steady presence beside her bed provided an anchor of stability in the medical uncertainty. Nurse Patricia Williams had been assigned specifically to Camilla's care, chosen for her expertise with high-profile patients and her ability to maintain both discretion and warmth. She had been quietly monitoring the conversation while adjusting IV medications, ensuring that Camilla remained comfortable while the important decisions were being made. "The procedure is scheduled for this afternoon," Patricia explained gently. "We'll make sure you're completely comfortable throughout everything, Your Royal Highness." As the medical team prepared for the afternoon procedure, word of Camilla's hospitalization began to spread beyond the immediate circle of family and staff. The palace's communications team worked carefully to manage the flow of information, balancing the public's right to know with respect for medical privacy. A brief statement was prepared that would acknowledge the situation without providing unnecessary details. Charles remained at Camilla's bedside throughout the pre-procedure preparations, leaving only when absolutely required by medical protocol. The transformation in his usual demeanor was remarkable to observe. The formal public figure gave way to a deeply concerned husband whose primary focus was simply being present for the person he loved. The cardiac catheterization laboratory buzzed with quiet activity as Dr. Thornton and her team prepared for the procedure. The technology available at Royal United Hospital represented the finest in cardiac care, with equipment that could provide real-time imaging of Camilla's coronary arteries and guide the precise interventions needed to restore normal blood flow. "Everything looks excellent," Dr. Thornton announced as the procedure progressed. The blocked artery responded well to the intervention, and blood flow was restored with minimal complications. The cardiac team worked with practiced efficiency, their experience evident in every movement and decision. Charles waited in a private family room that had been specially prepared for the occasion. The space was comfortable, but couldn't distract from the anxiety of waiting while someone you love undergoes a medical procedure. He found himself reflecting on their years together, the challenges they had overcome, and the future they still hoped to share. When Dr. Thornton emerged from the catheterization lab, her smile provided the first genuinely positive news of an extremely difficult day. "The procedure was completely successful," she announced. "The blocked artery is now fully open, and blood flow has been restored. Your wife should make an excellent recovery." The relief that washed over Charles was almost overwhelming. The medical crisis that had begun in Camilla's garden that morning was finally moving toward resolution. He could return to her bedside with genuine hope rather than worried uncertainty. Camilla was wheeled back to her private room, still groggy from the procedure, but her vital signs showed immediate improvement. The crushing chest pain that had marked the beginning of her ordeal was gone, replaced by the manageable discomfort of the catheterization site and the lingering effects of sedation. As evening fell over the hospital, Charles maintained his vigil beside Camilla's bed. She drifted in and out of sleep, but each time she awakened, his hand was there to provide comfort and reassurance. The crisis had passed, but the emotional impact would take time to process fully. Dr. Thornton stopped by during her evening rounds, pleased with Camilla's progress and confident about her prognosis. With proper cardiac rehabilitation and lifestyle modifications, there's no reason she can't return to a completely normal, active life, she explained to Charles. This episode, while frightening, may actually prove to be a blessing in disguise if it motivates positive changes. The nursing staff worked through the night to monitor Camilla's recovery, adjusting medications and ensuring her comfort. The cardiac unit had returned to its normal rhythm, but the professionalism and care demonstrated during the crisis had been exceptional by any standard. By morning, Camilla was alert enough to have her first real conversation since the previous day's emergency. Her voice was still weak, but her personality began to shine through as she thanked each member of the medical team personally. The gracious woman who had spent decades in public service was evident even in her hospital bed. "I don't remember much from yesterday," she admitted to Charles, "but I remember trying to say your name. I needed you to know how much you mean to me." Charles squeezed her hand gently. His eyes bright with tears he no longer tried to hide. The medical crisis had reminded them both of what truly mattered, stripping away everything except their love for each other and gratitude for the time they had been given together. Dr. Thornton's morning rounds brought continued good news about Camilla's recovery. The cardiac enzymes that indicated heart damage were declining appropriately, and her heart rhythm had stabilized completely. The successful intervention had prevented significant long-term damage, and her prognosis was excellent. As they prepared for Camilla's transfer to a regular room and eventual discharge, both she and Charles reflected on how quickly life could change. The morning that began with gardening and routine royal duties had become a profound reminder of human vulnerability and the precious nature of every shared moment. The medical staff at Royal United Hospital had provided not just excellent clinical care, but had treated their patient and her family with dignity and compassion that reflected the finest traditions of healthcare. Their professionalism during a high-pressure situation had quite literally made the difference between life and death. When Camilla finally spoke Charles's name clearly for the first time since her collapse, it carried the weight of gratitude, love, and hope for all the conversations yet to come. The medics had reached her in time, the treatment had been successful, and their life together could continue with a renewed appreciation for each precious day.